All right. So we are here with Christopher Johnson in his law suite at law offices in Pasadena, California, on a beautiful, beautiful February day. Man, after the rain we've had, and now it's absolutely stunning outside.
Gorgeous.
So, Chris, tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised and all that.
Well, all fairly local. Was born in Fontana at the giant Kaiser Hospital and spent my first few years in Riverside, then in Arcadia, and then I went to Palm Springs for high school.
Wow. Palm Springs. It's just hot as all get out there, isn't it?
It will pretty much melt anything that's in the car in the summer.
I like going out there. When we had our place out there, I would drive out and I was close enough to a high school to listen to the marching bands on Friday night. That was kind of cool. That was like an Anytown USA kind of experience.
And a lot of people go to the football games on a Friday night. It was fun.
So where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to college?
I went to Wheaton College, which is just outside of Chicago.
Great.
So it was much colder than Palm Springs.
Wow. Was that undergrad or?
Undergrad. Yeah.
Wow. So for 4 years you were in Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of fun. Close enough to Chicago to get in and take in all the architecture there and the great food.
Right. Chicago, you could eat your way from one end to the other there.
Yes.
Amazing city.
Not much else to do in the wintertime.
That's right. Eating and drinking. That's right. I tell you. So after law school, where'd you go to law school?
I went to Pepperdine in Malibu.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
The only time I'll live in Malibu, I think. But that was great.
Beautiful campus.
Yes.
Beautiful campus. How do you stay focused when you've got the Pacific Ocean out there?
It was hard, but I guess fear of failing out was enough of a motivator.
I love it. Fear of failure. That drives most of us. So after Pepperdine, you passed the bar exam?
Oh, yeah. First try.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I hear. Well, so give me the statistic on that. How many people passed the first time?
Oh, I want to say it's always been around 50%.
Half.
And it is still, I think it's even less now. It's even harder. Or there's more people taking it. I don't know. But yeah, it's something like half. And then as part of the study that I did, some people who had passed the first time also recommended taking this class that's designed for people who failed.
Right.
And so that was also a little surreal, being in a room full of people who said the bar was stacked against them. A rigged test, but it was totally worth it.
Bias.
Yeah.
Bias. Boy. So tell me about your two boys.
Well, I've got two sons, Andrew and Zach, and they are both in school in Boston now.
Wow.
I think, reliving the cold winter experience. Zach is at MIT and studying computer science, and Andrew is at Berklee College of Music and kind of into composition and loves playing the electric guitar, but also plenty of other instruments. And it's kind of fun going back there and hearing him play and doing the recitals.
If you're going to be a musician, there's few better places to do it than Berklee. So much phenomenal music is continuing to come out of that campus.
It is amazing when you look it up, because I'd not even heard of it before he mentioned it.
Oh, wow.
But then you see all the famous people who've come out of there, and just the level of talent is pretty exciting.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. And they're both. And would you say that they're smart in their own way?
Yeah, definitely different interests for sure. Yeah. And then the MIT guy is really into running as well, so he's on the track team and cross country. And then Andrew is always been into music and noodling around that, and then is a huge Bernie Sanders supporter. So this year's been fun for him and volunteering for that.
That's funny. So, and Zach's a runner. He was an accomplished runner here in California. Were there any scholarships at all for that? For his
not at MIT, unfortunately, but he did. Yeah, I think it may have helped him get in. I mean, they really wanted him for the team, so that's been good.
That's great.
So we'll take that, but no, otherwise, no scholarships. Yeah.
Well, we do, as parents, we do what we have to do, right?
Yeah. You feel it hurts a little bit, but then it's fun seeing them succeed and seeing where they're going to go. And
that's right.
He got it's an internship that I was going to say paid, but as a lawyer, I guess they all have to be paid now because the lawyers got involved. But but he's going to be at the National Renewable Energy Center, something like that, in Golden, Colorado for the summer, which sounds pretty exciting. I wouldn't know what to do there, but
you run.
Yeah.
And you explore nature.
Run, yeah.
You hike.
Drink Coors if you're into that kind of thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely right.
And then something about, now I forget, but it's artificial intelligence and renewable energy.
Amazing. So. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And they're doing a good job of adulting.
They are. That's as I understand. I mean, it seems like they've got fresh clothes on and they're surviving, actually cooking their own meals, which is more than I did. The dining hall food sucked, but I still ate it because the alternative was making your own.
That's right. So, what? Oh, no ramen for you?
Some and a lot of the Del Taco or Taco Bell commercials were make a run for the border at the time, which I often did if it was beef ragu or something. And funny. I understand from Zach at MIT, they have the same food vendor that Wheaton did, and the food is still just as bad.
It's still terrible. I love it. I love it. So let's fast forward. You've been in practice one way or another for 20 years now. Is that right?
25.
Or longer? 25 years.
Yeah, I got to be an old guy.
And your specialty, your area of expertise is in the trust and how do I explain? How do I give a better
I do
definition?
a lot of planning, so writing wills and trusts, and then also anything in probate court. So after people have passed away, if they've got a will, or more likely don't have anything in place, we get the property out to the next people, or helping people wind up a trust. And then if people are not getting along, or the trustee's behaving badly, as we say, then we get involved with that too. And then something else too is it seems to be growing as conservatorships, and that's something where someone loses competence and either they don't have powers of attorney in place, or maybe they do, but again, the family is at odds and need to resolve it in court.
So a conservatorship, is that something that a judge, you bring as an attorney, you bring an action to court, the judge says, okay, we're going to appoint someone as a conservator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a family member?
It usually is a family member. Sometimes, and it's a growing field, it's a professional. There's something called professional fiduciary, where they are paid to be the conservator or maybe paid to be the trustee. And that happens a lot when it just isn't anyone trustworthy, or the court thinks is good fit, or people just cannot agree, and then it's a little easier to bring in a neutral third party.
Wow. And I'm guessing that gets really expensive for people to not settle their differences outside.
It does. It is much cheaper for people to get along. And certainly we try to get there and do a lot of mediation. And I volunteer at the court as a mediator as well. Yeah. But if people can find a way to settle their differences and even put something in place where they can be sure that the right thing is happening, it sure works out to be a lot cheaper than fighting it to the end.
Boy. So getting I'm going through this myself with aging parents right now. Yeah. And we have there's plenty of older people in the office where I work, and we have a similar conversation about Medicare, Medi-Cal, a lack of planning, really. Right. And try as we might to have that conversation with our parents.
It's difficult.
It's like if I'm your son, I'm like, hey, Dad, it seems as though your days are numbered.
Yeah. There's no great way to bring it up. Or even when people do, sometimes, the parents realize it's a good idea. Other times they just do not want to discuss it, or feel private about it, or superstitious, or there's all kinds of reasons. But I know when I first started, I think it was about 30% of people had some sort of plan in place.
Mhm.
And the statistic, as I understand, is still the same. So
Wow.
25 years later, even with LegalZoom and stuff online and whatever, it's still the same as far as the number of people that have actually done something
Right.
to plan. So it is, we try and we do our best. And a lot of times what will bring people in is if they've gone through it with another relative, if they've gone through the probate process,
Right.
or even worse, if they've done the conservatorship process, they realize they need to do something to avoid that. Because even when nobody's fighting, it's still way too expensive, or say much more than it needs to be.
Boy. It is, well, experience being the best teacher.
Yes.
They're like, I don't want to hurt like that again, ever.
Well, yeah, it's, I tell people probably on the probate side, say just, typically, and we do a lot of probates, it's a house, it's the main asset, maybe a little money, but usually a house. And on that house, to get it from parent to the children is about, between the executor and the attorney and court fees and everything, maybe 8-9% of the total value of the house.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Plus, and then if you're selling it, the commission on top, it just eats a lot out of it. And that's kind of a shock to people.
So that's when somebody dies intestate without a will.
Yeah, without a will.
Would that be the most complicated way to
probably, because then it might be a free for all as to who files the petition, because there's a priority and there are lists of people, and first it's surviving spouse, and if no surviving spouse, it's the kids,
right.
And then it moves on down to further out. But at each level of priority, say the children, they each have equal priority. So
right.
If someone's not getting along, that's where problems start. The fight could cost a lot just to get someone appointed if they can't agree.
I heard recently, twice actually in a week, 2 different people told me that these are people that are in their 80s. In both of their wills, they're completely, not one doesn't know the other, but their wills read very similarly in that the will specifically say, if you guys can't come to terms, then you get nothing, right? If you don't follow my instructions, then you get nothing. And I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would enforce that in a court of law. That would
be tough, but something we do a lot is to say that if people can't come to a decision, then it's up to the executor or the trustee. And so someone's got the final authority, and there's some incentive too. If they're going to fight over the end table or the painting or who gets to buy the house from the others, all that kind of stuff. If they can't agree, then the decision's going to be made for them, and they may not like it.
Wow. Now, succession, like somebody passes away and it's their surviving spouse and then the kids, right?
Yeah.
Does that differ by state, or is that the same across the United States?
It does. Each state is a little bit different. In California, if there's a surviving spouse, they get all of the community property, and then they get a portion of the separate property. And so separate is something you brought to the marriage or inherited, got as a gift.
Right.
And that separate property, if there's one child, that child gets 50%, the spouse gets 50%. If there's more than one, the kids get 2/3, spouse 1/3. But then something else, and actually a lawyer didn't even realize this, I explained to him the other day, is that further out relatives, like say there aren't any kids, then the nearest batch of relatives, so maybe siblings of the deceased, get 50%. Surviving spouse gets 50% of that separate property, which can cause some fights if people haven't planned. Because if you have a will or a trust, you can say who gets what, and that's the final word. But if you don't have that, then the law splits it up according to this. And again, that's where some fights happen. Maybe things have to be sold to be divided. And then also where we attorneys get involved and educate others is, what's separate versus community. A lot of people just kind of assume it's all community, or I had one where This guy came to the marriage with a house,
Right.
but through several refinances, kept borrowing, paying it off,
Right.
and it was paid off with community property. So the surviving spouse owned most of it by
Oh, wow.
the time he died, which came as a shock to his other kids and their attorney.
Wow. But the thing is, in title, like you can hold if the husband held property as a married man as his sole and separate property, right? So on the books, like technically, he owns this property, and it doesn't belong to his spouse.
Yeah.
And then he dies.
Yep.
And the spouse inherits that property and the debt.
Yeah, that too.
The debt. Let's not forget about
ask
that.
what happens with the debt, and that it comes along with the property.
It has to be satisfied as well.
Yeah.
That's well. Now in California, if you're married and you buy property and you want it in your own name, you have to deed off the other spouse. There's a document that gets filed,
and because you can take title, married, man or woman as sole and separate property.
Right.
But for the title company, just to be sure, and the lenders, they usually insist on also a quitclaim deed from other spouse whose name is not going to be on title, to make sure they are acknowledging that they own no piece of it. But then later on, of course, things get muddled, and do they pay off the loan with community assets, and does that give that surviving spouse a piece of it? Because it's not just divorce, it's a death too. If title's kind of muddled and there's no will or trust, then that's where we're kind of ripe for us to get out the calculators and figure out the dueling valuations of who owns what.
It's a right for litigation, I think. Is that the phrase?
Yes. And forensic accountants and
and we're going to pause. I've always liked the career field of forensic accounting. I mean, accounting doesn't sound very exciting. In the music business, the big record labels hire forensic accountants to go into the record companies and see if how much the record company's stealing from the artist.
Exactly.
I don't think it's ever a question of if they are or they are not. It's how much. And how big is the penalty going to be, But I always like that because a forensic accountant has to have a depth of knowledge to know how those books are managed / mismanaged, right? Or hidden, how funds are sort of spirited away.
Yeah, it brings much more certainty to something that people just kind of in their heads or their off-the-cuff calculations can be very different.
Yeah. So. All right. So if you were to recommend a book, and I didn't ask you this ahead of time, I probably should have. If you could recommend a book for for people to prepare their parents for that conversation about succession, wills, all of that ugly stuff that nobody wants to talk about, is there a book that comes to mind that you might recommend us? People?
And I think I checked to see if it's still in print. I'll preface this by saying I don't normally like self-help documents, but this is one from Nolo Press that was kind of, before the internet and all that, and they are on the internet and sell stuff there. But before that, it was, a lot of books on, write your own will, do your own divorce, all that. And again, I think you probably make mistakes writing your own, and which may not be evident until death. But one good book that I think explains estate planning very well is called Plan Your Estate by Nolo Press.
Plan Your Estate.
And that one...
Is it quite old now?
I don't know when the last revision has been, so I should check on that.
Plan Your Estate.
But what's nice is, and I don't even think it has forms in it, it just explains what things are and why you need them. And explain even like titling and community property. It goes through powers of attorney, trusts, the probate process, and wills. So it explains it all very well in pretty simple terms. So even when new lawyers would come in back when I was with a big firm, I'd even give them that book to read through,
Oh, wow.
or just use as a reference. Because again, it's people don't want to say what they don't know, but it explains it very well as to what each thing does. And so I think that's a nice spot, and it's pretty simple just because it's broken down by chapter, so you can digest a little bit of time or go back if you forget about something. But I like it because it does explain these things and why they're necessary.
Right.
So I like that one. I don't know if I've really come across any others. Something I really do want to find and have not found a good one yet. And so in my spare time, I have to write it, but is a guidebook for trustees, because I think a lot of people, they step in as trustees, say after the parents have died or a friend, or when that person just doesn't have the competence anymore and they need to manage things for them. They ask a lot, well, what do I need to do? And we'll explain, but it's kind of overwhelming at first. And so I sure would like to have some kind of handbook they could refer back to about what their duties are, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't, and just some reassurance too that, they're on the right path and doing well.
It seems to me, having going through this myself, it seems like we wait too late to have the conversation with mom and dad.
Yeah.
Right. And for example, if mom is not necessarily incapacitated, but she is just addled, confused, etc., being moved from hospital to urgent care to the intensive care unit and from place to place to place. And imagine being 80 and medicated and surgery and etc., and the disorientation that goes on with all that. They ask you where you are, and that really should be a multiple choice question, So I guess the struggle is to have that conversation when people have their faculties about them. The problem is they don't necessarily want to have that conversation, and then it's too late.
And I say at the very least, people should at least tell the people they've named as successors. Who's going to step in when they can no longer do it for whatever reason, or even if it's a temporary thing, to step in. They should at least know where to find the right documents, and then have a list of the accounts or assets. And just because, you've got identity theft problems, certainly from the lawyer's perspective, you don't need account numbers on there. You don't need social security numbers. You just need where things are at.
Right.
So
makes it easier.
It sure makes, then they can contact the institutions and then know where money is or where money's coming from. Like all of that stuff. It's just trying to track that down when you don't have it is really difficult, because, thanks to privacy laws, it's a lot, probably for good, but it's a lot harder to find those things now. So, the best we could do is like old mail, which they may not get anymore when things are online, and tax returns. And that may not give the whole picture. So, or you find like life insurance information that's 40 years old and have to track down that company to see if it's even still a policy. And it's tough for them too. So all that stuff, it's a lot easier if you could just write down. Ideally it'd be every year, but maybe it's every 5. You put a list of, maybe assets and liabilities, where they're at. And that sure is a big help.
Now, how does a successor differ from a power of attorney, for example?
Well, the power of attorney is there usually if someone's incapacitated. So it's only good while they're alive, but some people think it's, it's a will substitute, and it's not. It's only, say, the financial one. And there are different kinds. We attorneys usually do one of two. A durable is called. That means when it survives incapacity. So a regular general power of attorney, say, the form you might pick up off the internet, it might not be any good once the person loses capacity. And that's when you really want it. So you want the durable one. And then there's one that becomes effective when doctors say you're incapacitated. There's another one that just becomes effective immediately. And depending on the client's comfort level, either one's good, but they'll do the job when, you're not able to understand what you have anymore and someone needs to pay your bills for you. And so it's like the day-to-day financial stuff, paying taxes, dealing with insurance companies, that kind of thing. And then there's a separate one, and people ask if they can be combined, and I've never seen a way to do it. So that separate is medical power of attorney, and that is strictly healthcare issues. And that's the one people say, well, it's the one that lets someone pull the plug. It's that, but it's also before that. Again, if they don't have competence, or maybe even are in a coma, or for whatever reason, or have Alzheimer's, just even regular medical decisions, getting someone to the doctor and being able to talk with the doctor with HIPAA regulations, you need that power of attorney. So I tell people, even if you've got no assets, you need both those powers of attorney, because that's going to come up if you're incompetent.
Wow. Another thing that comes up is the DNR, or the Advanced Healthcare Directives.
Yeah.
And that's another conversation that people just do not want to have.
Yeah. And I'd say at the very least, at least do that healthcare power of attorney. Because in California, that's usually combined with what we call the Advanced Healthcare Directive or Living Will. But even if you don't want to get into what you want there, then it's really up to the agent at that time. But as I said, even before getting to that decision on whether you live or die, it's just the regular day-to-day healthcare stuff that if you don't have it, someone needs to go to court and get a conservatorship. And even when everybody's in agreement, it's probably going to cost you $8,000.
Wow.
Initially. And then if you need to count every year, another few thousand at least.
Woo.
And then the court, to protect you, appoints an attorney that you pay for. So that's another few thousand. So it's just, I tell people, I know the thought process and maybe the conversations around a power of attorney are uncomfortable, but it sure makes things a lot better when it's needed.
Wow. So maybe instead of writing your guidebook for trustees, maybe you should do a Death for Dummies.
That's
one that they never did. The For Dummies series. There's not a Death for Dummies.
Well, yeah, kind of if then sorts of questions. As people, it's very, very confusing in the end, and you get plenty of bad advice from the bank and your neighbors and everyone else on what to do, or who's responsible for debts, and people call wanting to be paid, and of course creditors they're not the most honest people, and so they lie about who needs to pay what. So all of that, it's probably a good idea to have that book.
Interesting question. So somebody passes away and they've got consumer debt, maybe a car lease, credit cards, etc. And there's a will, there's no trust. Let's just say that there's a will.
Yeah.
Right. So can the credit card companies go after the contents of the will, or their heirs? Yeah,
the law sets up an order of priority on who gets paid first. And so it's first is funeral expenses. And although taxes are always first, really, because they can get paid before anyone. And then on down to secured and then unsecured debt. But the estate assets are the ones that are really responsible. So you can't, like, if someone dies with $5,000 in the bank and $30,000 in debts, say the child gets $5,000. Well, they're only liable up to that $5,000 for the debts. So they can't be made to pay for the other, no matter what anyone else says.
Right.
And then the other thing is to enforce those claims if it's unsecured debt, like credit cards. that usually has to be done in probate court. And so probate has to be opened, and then the creditor has a certain amount of time, usually 120 days from the time it's open, so 4 months, to file their creditor claim.
Wow.
So what really happens is if you don't have probate, or even if you do, a lot of times those things get negotiated. And they've also only got 1 year for most claims to actually enforce something like file that claim. So a lot of times, as a practical matter, they don't really end up getting paid.
Or they write it off, or they sell the debt to somebody else, to some other slimy credit company.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if they don't get their claim in on time, it's dead. But again, they don't. Right. They're not going to tell the beneficiaries that. So that's where, if there are debt issues, again, best to talk with the lawyer about it. And then we did have one probate that went on so long because the beneficiaries could not get along. Credit card companies had actually filed their claims timely, but by the time we closed the probate, maybe 4 years had gone by, they'd given up, and they said, "Oh no, you don't owe us anything."
Never mind.
Yeah, no, we wrote that off a long time ago.
That's death and taxes.
Yeah. So but in that case, you probably don't want to wait 4 or 5 years to get your inheritance, but if you do, there's that side benefit.
Wow. And that inheritance is that a state law or is that federal?
It's state.
But we get like it's some huge amount of money that we're not taxed until.
Oh yeah,
right?
It is. I believe this year it's 11.6 million,
wow.
And that goes up with inflation every year too.
So I could inherit $11.6 million and not have any tax liability.
Yeah. And there's no California inheritance tax anymore. There's no estate tax at all. So it's just federal. And it's only 11.6 and above.
Wow.
And then that number is set to expire in 2025. But even if it does, it goes back to half that.
Right.
And again, up every year with inflation. So there's most estates we deal with are not taxable.
Yeah.
I'm happy to work on your $200 million estate, but we don't get many of those.
You'll find some time in your schedule.
Yeah, we could make time for that.
Fit them in. That's right. So, what did I don't want to forget to ask you about your favorite lawyer jokes.
Oh, gosh.
Because every career has their bad jokes.
They do, and now I don't know if I can remember any.
So, okay, I'll give you one that I remember.
Uh-huh.
Right? What do you call one lawyer at the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, a good start.
A good start. That's not so bad.
It's all right. That's something about ethical dilemma for lawyers, but I think it was just, whether you'd gotten overpaid on something. Do you tell your partner about it?
Oh, that's honor among thieves. I think they call that.
Yeah. No, we probate lawyers are the nice ones. And wear sensible shoes.
That's right. There's not one pair of Allen Edmonds in your closet, I tell you. So I'm glad you said that. So why did you choose this area of law to get into? What was it? What was exciting about it for you?
I think it was probably the family history. My grandparents on my mom's side, her parents, had come out to California to work for World Vision. Mm-hmm. And the only job available to him was the director of planned giving, which is kind of, the people leaving stuff in their wills and their trusts or setting up charitable trusts. And so he had to learn all about it. And then when his boss, who'd founded World Vision, retired, he went and often started his own company to do the same sort of thing.
Wow. For
other smaller charities and kind of be their planned giving department. And I'd grown up in the company and worked summers there and heard all about estate planning and couldn't really figure out what it was until much later. But then you see the importance and the need for it, and then what a difference it makes also for these charities too to get things.
Right.
And so when I went to law school, I thought, well, if there's nothing that seems better than that. I want to work in this field. And so when I got out of law school, the only jobs being offered in the recession in the 90s were insurance defense jobs, which I'd worked in and clerked for. But basically, it's when your client, the client of the insurance company, hits someone else with their car, it is your job to figure out how to pay as little as possible.
Right.
And after summarizing the medical records for horses in a horse trailer, I thought there's got to be a better way to make money. This is not what I want to do. And again, I interviewed a lot here in the LA area, and really the only people offering jobs at that time were the insurance defense company. And great for people who wanted to do it. But what I saw was if people got into it, they really didn't get out. And so I just thought, well, probably that's, I've got no kids and low expenses. I can start on my own and just start doing wills and trusts. And that's what I did. Wow. So it was less than a year after getting out of law school. I just started up in Pasadena and kind of didn't know what I was doing, but had a lot of law books and started knocking on doors and trying to find business.
Wow. Was it back then, was it the law office of Christopher Johnson?
Yes.
As opposed to offices?
I don't know when the change happened exactly, but yeah, I've got law offices now just because I don't like sitting at the same desk every day. So, and I like getting to Palm Springs when I can.
Oh, don't I know it.
Yeah. So that's, we cover kind of Pasadena and points east out to Palm Springs, and have our places in Glendora and Chino Hills out to Indian Wells, and try and cover the courts from downtown LA out to Palm Springs. Uh-huh. So that's, keeps me busy enough.
Now, is one court any more organized than the other? Like, is it you like working out of a certain court?
It depends on the time you ask. I mean, most of the judges are pretty friendly, and even the cranky ones don't last. So, but I can think of some that I'm thankful that have retired. Although one popped up as a replacement judge one time to fill in, and that was a little scary. But
now, are judges nominated? Or chosen by somebody who?
I think they're and I don't know the difference completely.
Yeah.
But because some are elected, some are chosen. And then maybe they get up for re-election and others. So I don't really get it. And then there's also commissioners who are not quite judges, but essentially fill the same role and do exactly the same thing. So I've never really looked in to figure out how it all works. But I actually haven't seen any of the probate judges up for re-election. So I don't know if they're that or not. But I know once they get in, they usually like the gig, because it's, again, the probate lawyers are, even when we're fighting among each other, tend to be, I think, a nicer group than others.
You're civil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're civil to one another.
Just to remind us, the judge out in Palm Springs likes to read some quote about civility in the profession before opening up every hearing.
Wow.
So
nice.
They get some amusing stuff. And usually, people are pretty nice in his courtrum. So
well, he's setting a tone, or he or she setting a tone.
Pointing out, don't be a jerk. You can, because I think that's probably annoying to judges, between that or being unprepared.
Yeah. So. And they're still wearing robes.
Yes.
Even in Palm Springs and Chino Hills and
all? There's one in San Bernardino that just has the robe open, and he does wear stuff underneath, but he's a little more casual. But
they need like a summer weight.
They do. I think it's
like a vest.
It would be, just something to suggest a robe, but you don't, because it probably does get hot. Yeah. I did some fill-in work as it's like small claims appeals, I think, way back in Glendale. Yeah. And they give you the robe to wear, and it is a little hot under there.
Yeah. So. Well, at least you don't have to wear wigs anymore.
Yeah.
Well, white powdery wigs. I'm sure
we should.
I'm sure there are people that you come across that are have their creative hair pieces.
Or court attire. What passes off as a suit, some days.
Yeah.
It's a little suspect, because I don't know that there's any law requiring it, but yes, everyone still wears a suit to court.
Yeah. Well, the lawyers do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Clerks and steno and all that. They're dressy. Right?
Yeah. They're casualties have not hit, except for some people who show up as the witnesses or parties, because it is. As I say, I mean the hearings can be interesting. You don't know when it's going to be, but certainly some amusing things that happen.
So when you work with people, are you finding people are a little bit more educated because of the internet, because of Google, or
to some extent?
Are we still malleable clay when we walk in your office?
Well, or about malleable clay. I mean, I think what is a little easier, it's easier for them to log on. In most courts, you can figure out when's your next court date, what's happening in the case. If you can decipher that, it's certainly easier than it used to be.
Right.
That part's there. But, people still, I think the internet research, it's a lot like WebMD. You still may not understand the process. So people will ask a lot of questions that tell me they've been researching, but still don't quite get it. Because probate's just kind of an odd area of the law anyway. And so there's a whole lot to know, and it doesn't make a lot of sense at first.
Is there anything within probate that changes with time, like laws, codes, statutes, stuff like that?
Slowly.
Like what kind of thing would change? Like, I'm not sure.
Well, when I first started practice, say a big one for us was the healthcare directives or powers of attorney. For some reason, the maximum length of time they could last, for some reason, was 7 years. Oh. And I think in 93, I would say 94, right before I started, that changed so that they're good basically until you revoke them, unless you put in an expiration date.
Gotcha.
So that was something and for a long time, I think attorneys didn't realize that they could last longer. So you'd run into people preparing stuff that would still expire. And to me, it didn't make sense, because once you're incompetent, well, you can't sign a new one. So what good is it? So that's one. Or there's something called the small estate affidavit. And that is something where if you have less than a certain amount of assets in your estate, then the beneficiaries can just sign a notarized affidavit and attach a death certificate and get the asset handed over to them. Oh. So usually like bank accounts. And the number, when I first started, was 60,000, went up to 100,000, then 150. Now they finally have, I think, done the right thing and made it is like 162,000, I want to say, and it goes up with inflation every year. Because we get sometimes. I had one probate where it was 153,000 in a credit union account, which meant we had to do probate. There was no. I was hoping maybe be a tax payment or something that could zap out enough to get it under the amount. That we were stuck. So. But otherwise, not a lot. I mean, there's some law changes. We're still waiting to see how it shakes out, but there's some laws that make it a little bit easier to prove a will. Like if it looks like if someone was attempting to make a will but didn't quite fit all the requirements, I think it's a little bit easier to get that accepted in court. I've just not, in practicality, seen it. But something I have done for a lot of clients is we use an intake form that kind of goes through their assets, their heirs, who they want as trustees, how they want things divided.
Right.
And I'll often have people sign that just because if something does happen in the meantime, that might work as a will and show their intent. Because especially if it's a situation where what they're wanting is drastically different than what the law says would happen or what their current estate plan says would happen.
Right.
So that's, but I haven't had to test it yet. So we'll see what happens.
So even if somebody has a will, a third party can contest that will.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's long and expensive to
It
do
is.
as well.
It is. I mean, that's just to get started is probably 15, 20,000
Wow.
up to trial, maybe near 100,000 or more, plus all your experts. And there aren't, people are always afraid of a will contest, but really in reality, just because they're expensive and require such good evidence, there's not too many of them. But typically where we'll get involved is if it looks like someone just had some kind of diminished capacity, like they didn't quite understand what was going on, or they were so frail or so dependent on this person, maybe they were kind of forced into it.
Right.
And again, to prove that requires medical evidence. So if there's good medical records to show that someone just was out of it or kind of out of it, well, then that might be something you'd look at.
Right.
And when things were done, or how out of the norm is their plan, or how much does it differ from what they had before.
Right.
That kind of stuff, or a forgery, and those come up. So that, but yeah, typically is not done too much, just because you got to have really good evidence. I mean, people could try, but I do tell people great insurance against a claim is having an attorney do the will or the trust for you, because then you've got a good witness to say, well, this person, knew what they were doing. Right. They seemed competent to me when they came, and it's someone, who's not benefiting by it, is the one preparing it.
Right.
And then they can also follow the protocols like we do to talk with the person alone, not have the beneficiary who says, Mom really wants to change your will to leave it all to me, and, screw my other no good brothers and sisters, which happens a lot. Yeah. But yes, we can kind of figure out, and it certainly happened to me. I get people alone, they may tell a different story. And so all of that to say that, especially if you think it's going to be a volatile situation after you die, it's probably better to have an attorney do that.
Yeah.
And I think that probably fends off a lot of contests too.
All right. So. Well, I imagine timing has a lot to do with it.
Yes, better to do it when you are healthy and no pressure.
Not the 30-year junior wife that's encouraging you to change your will.
Yes. Oh, that's another good point though too. Something people aren't aware of is, even if you've done your planning or haven't, either way, once you get married, the law assumes that you would want to include your spouse, which is usually a good assumption, but maybe it's not the right one for you. So I tell people you either want to change your estate planning either right before marriage and note that you're doing it because of that, or after you get married, just make sure it still does what you want to do, because otherwise the new spouse gets, again, their share under intestacy laws, which mean all the community property and a third to half of your separate property.
Right.
And so to avoid those fights between them and other relatives, better to just, even if it's a short amendment to your trust, to say everything stays the same. Right. That's good enough.
Right. Wow. More squabbling.
Yeah, because what happens a lot is, once someone dies, and they get past a bit of the grieving and tears, they say, well, what am I going to get out of this? Or what can I get? Right. And that's when people start looking at what can they do, and may or may not be what the person who died wanted to happen. But even, and even if they said that's not what they wanted to happen, as I understand, there aren't video wills here. or
Are they
even
not
just
admissible?
oral wills. No,
No.
not. I think I think it's coming, but
What better evidence? I mean, I'm assuming that people do a written will in addition to, like, somebody could be recording us right
Yeah.
now, and you're saying, okay, Lee, we've drafted your will for you, and is it, please review it, blah blah blah, make sure that we've laid out in reasonable detail what it is you want, and who gets what, blah blah blah. It's how do you dispute both a written medium and a video of you sitting with your lawyer?
Yeah. Which also means that, you better be in good shape when you're signing it, because if you look a little out of it, or
well, the camera puts on what, 10, 15 pounds?
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, maybe just audio.
Who wants to do hair and makeup when they're meeting their trust attorney?
Well, I will say, those video depositions are good a lot of times, just because people, the lighting's crummy, the background's crummy, and the sound's bad, picture quality's bad. So someone's going to look bad.
We all look
even
guilty
on their best day. Exactly.
We all look guilty, regardless.
So, if we're doing a depo of someone, you like sending out that video notice, because maybe that works into a settlement, because they don't want to be on camera looking.
That's right.
Looking guilty.
That's right. So is there such a thing as a biggest mistake that people make in their estate planning? Or a common misstep when people come in and they say, I want to plan for my...
Well, I don't know in the planning. Well, some of the mistakes I've seen, say, in reviewing the do-it-yourself wills, are maybe putting in the successor trustees not understanding that they should come after you. So sometimes people make their brother immediately the trustee of everything they have, which is maybe not their intent. Or they assume it's going to a spouse, but what they actually do is give away their stuff to the kids immediately and cut out mom. So,
oops.
So, that's bad. But then probably the biggest one I see is joint tenancy, where people, especially when parents get older, they think rather than go through the whole power of attorney thing, they just talk to the bank. The bank says, well, add Junior to the account so they can sign for you.
Right.
But what they've done is or they add Junior to the title on the property. Well, they've made him an owner then.
That's right. And
if there are other people involved, as usually are, that means they're cut out, because the last surviving joint tenant wins, and maybe Junior is not going to remember things the way they were discussed earlier.
Right.
And the law says, unless you can prove otherwise, the joint tenancy survivor is the one that gets everything.
Right.
So I think a lot of times there are people who wind up getting title to the house where it wasn't intended, or getting all the money that's left in the big bank account. And again, that wasn't what people expected.
Right.
Because a will doesn't, or even a trust, it doesn't affect joint tenancy. It just, joint tenancy trumps anything else. And so even if your will says divide my bank account this way, most likely, unless you could use that will to prove that they didn't intend for the joint tenancy to work, it probably just goes to the survivor. And I think that I've seen a lot of cases where it goes to probably the wrong people, or when people are in and we're planning and that comes up that things are in joint tenancy, we want to make sure that we don't have that problem. Unless, sometimes there are cases where they do want that person to have it, but you just want to be sure that's what they actually want.
Well, what is interesting to me is if I wanted to be malicious, if I wanted to tie up a property that I own, I could put you on it. I could deed a portion of my property to you. Sure. And then I would have to, whoever wanted to dispose of that property would have to find you and have you get deeded off of that property. And that's kind of a scary thought, because it doesn't require any action on your behalf if somebody deeds you onto a property.
Oh yeah, you might not even know about it,
right?
Or
So how is that fair, or how is that?
It's not
legal.
And you would think there should be some sort of notice to the actual transferee of the property. There was a probate I was in that, we didn't end up pursuing it because the property was underwater, but there's a scammer who apparently had gone to prison for this, got out, started doing the same thing again.
Missed prison.
Despite many articles being written about him, which is how I found out about it. But his deal was to lend a little bit of money to people to get current on their payments, but he'd make his fake LLC a joint tenant on the property. And there's no way to track down the LLC because it doesn't exist.
Oh, boy.
And so you can't find it anywhere or find him because it had many aliases and used a PO box. And then at some point he would take over the property, put in renters who would pay money to him, and do that until someone caught up with him and foreclosed on the house.
Oh, boy. Because he wasn't making his payments, his mortgage payments.
Yeah, he wasn't
or tax
either.
Payments anyway.
No, but that was his thing, was to get on title, but then also beyond that, you got to prove that this whole thing is fake. And again, in that case, we gave up on it. But then I was reading an article another attorney had written about a similar case, and I asked if it was the same guy. I said, "Yep."
He's infamous in the community.
Yeah, so I guess you do it enough times, somehow you go around and collect your rent. And I don't know that, this is a few years ago, so I don't know if he's been arrested again. But again, that kind of stuff, the police departments just don't. It's a little too complicated to pursue, so they don't. And people like that get away with it. So I was actually surprised he was arrested the first time. But then to sit in prison and not come up with a better way, that also surprised me. Like, usually they figure, well, here's how I do it better the next time. This guy just did the exact same thing. And apparently it's working for him.
Well, I guess if you're a criminal, you know that way of life.
Yeah. What else do you know?
What else do you know?
You got pretty good at it.
You pretty good, meaning, well, what's the bell curve? Like one stint in prison is you're like towards the bottom.
Yeah.
Are you progressing in your career field? Because
maybe he's got like more properties under fake management.
Maybe he's taught others.
Well,
and then now he's deriving a percentage of all of their ill deeds.
He might be on late night TV with a proven 7-step system.
That's right. Who's the wolf? What's the fellow? Jordan Belfort.
Oh, Belfort.
Belfort.
Yeah. Wolf of Wall Street.
Boy.
Well, before him, the Tom Vu on the boat.
Jesus, I remember him. All right. So Chris, let's wrap up with the 10 questions. I don't know if you watch Inside the Actor's Studio.
Oh yeah.
But I always like when he asks at the end of their interviews, he asks the same 10 questions. And it's just always fun. It's always funny to sort of hear the answers to them.
So it's been a long time since I've watched, so it's probably good because I don't remember the questions.
Well, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
You haven't committed them to memory? No?
No, I'm that lazy.
So, okay, the first question is, what's your favorite word?
Wow.
This isn't meant to make you sweat.
I know, you think something would pop into my head, but the first word that comes to mind is probably, which is a good lawyer word.
Okay. Nice that you used all the syllables. What's your least favorite word?
Oh, so tough.
Defendant?
Let's say interrogatories, because those are definitely a pain to answer.
Interrogatories. So what is an interrogatory?
That is a list, usually a long list of questions on paper sent by opposing counsel for your client to answer, which means a lot of work.
And creative writing, I'm guessing?
As much as we can, yes.
Okay. What turns you on?
A weekend in Palm Springs.
That was easy. And what turns you off?
Rude people.
What sound or noise do you love?
Birds chirping in the morning.
Unless they're, do you get parrots out there in Glendora?
Yeah, that's
That's a different kind of birds chirping. That'll scare the bejesus out of you.
yeah. They because they like gather 100 at a time at the tree right outside your window.
That's right. What sound or noise do you hate?
You know, now that I'm a new resident of Glendora, I'm realizing it's jet engines. I didn't get, other than the B-52 or B-2 whatever flyover for the
Right.
Rose Bowl, you don't get that in Pasadena.
Right.
But it's like pretty several times a night. They're high up, so it's kind of faint,
Wow.
but you still hear jets flying overhead.
Son of a gun. In Glendora.
Yeah, I had no idea. And I guess that's part of, I saw that, you know, in my research, it looked like the flight paths were actually changed a while ago, just to allow more planes to fly in our crowded airspace. And
Right.
I think there are more than there used to be. But yeah, and I ask other people, like, I didn't even hear it. But to me,
Now, did the previous owners of your property disclose that to you?
they did not. But they probably, like, over the sound of their barking dogs and
They had their own
they
white
probably,
noise.
yeah, I don't think they heard it.
What's your favorite curse word?
Well, lately, and I hope my mom doesn't hear this, but it's like, God damn it, just because there's a guy who walks up and down the street and has probably been here at least 25 years, because as long as I've been working in Pasadena, but just kind of shuffles up, checks the spare change in the newspaper machines that are still out there.
Right.
And when he doesn't find it, just, God damn it.
Now, is he's the short fella in the baseball cap,
Yeah.
and backpack,
Yeah.
khaki pants?
Yeah.
Wow. That's male.
Yeah.
That's a male person.
Yeah.
I was never sure if he's
If you get up
they
close.
are male or female. See, I'm getting better at that.
Yeah.
I'm getting far more politically correct.
There, the
And-
pronouns. But yeah, and also, yeah, I realize when I curse, I probably sound just like that guy, you know, someone else.
And what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I like real estate. I just figure at some point, you know, it's probably too late to jump into that. But I've always kind of had the fascination with it and thought, I'm sure like everyone else, flipping houses would be fun. But, you know, I realize I'm probably better at the law. So I'll stick with that.
Well, there's the law has there's a large, if you're going to be the best example of an agent, the law plays a big part in that, and ethics, and what you can and cannot do, and what you should and should not do.
They are very similar because we solve a lot of problems, and we have to be honest about, or the best of us are honest about the process,
Yep.
about what it's going to involve, you know, planning ahead for the best result. So yeah, I think they're very similar, and certainly the agents we recommend to people kind of follow the same rules because, like you know, there are a handful of great agents, and then many awful ones.
That's true.
And the ones that get to your clients first may not be the best ones, unfortunately.
No, and you find yourself doing the work of two people oftentimes.
Yes.
And there are, you know, you could have a full-time job reporting infractions and violations. It could easily be a full-time job if you just listen to what's going on out there in the marketplace. Terrible.
Yeah. Well, and it can be frustrating because you see someone who's not your client getting screwed over, and you want to say something, and
That's right.
you know whether you should or not, you know, and usually you can't. I know lawyers were even bound up a little bit tighter, but it is frustrating to see some people taking advantage of other people.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, I think I can only assume that we're the same in that we want to be part of the solution and not the problem.
Yeah. Well, ideally, it's a long-term career. You know?
That's true. But if you can't if you feel like you're going to get censured in some way by reporting
Yeah.
bad behavior or illegal behavior, then you're stuck. More stuck than I am.
Yeah. What I have found is some of the worst offenders for attorneys who just did some outrageous things or were just the most difficult to deal with do end up getting disbarred later. And not that I had anything to do with it, because I didn't, but you see it does catch up with people at some point.
Yeah. Well, I hope so.
You would hope so, but yeah,
so.
and it actually does. Because there are plenty of others who seem to get away with things, but only for so long. You're going to piss off the wrong person at some point.
Now, with the bar association, can I enter a lawyer's name? Like, let's say I'm shopping for a divorce attorney. Can I go into a California Bar Association and see if somebody refers me to, Fred Schmuckatelli, attorney at law? Can I look at their record?
You can.
And see if they've ever been in trouble? Or
So you can go on the California Bar website, and it's got a name that's too long. So you just search California Bar.
Google California Bar Association.
And then on the first page, there's an attorney search thing. So you can put in someone's name, and you'll find out they've got to keep up with the bar, their current address and contact information. And along with that, you will find out if there are if they've had any kind of discipline against them.
Right.
That shows up. And since a certain time, maybe in the last 10 years or so, they'll have a PDF file of the whole thing.
Action.
Yeah. So you can find out why. Whatever happened to them.
Yep.
And so that's helpful too, because, in some cases, I think there are good attorneys who've run afoul of it, and I still recommend them to people, with the caveat. And then there are others that just are like, well, it's probably good that that's up there to prevent it from happening again.
Absolutely. In real estate, it's the same way. You can go to the DRE, Department of Real Estate website, and type in someone's name and see their license status. And if they've been in trouble, there's a PDF. There's a file of what they did, of the whatever infraction they're found guilty of.
Yeah.
And you can read all about what they did wrong and what their fine was, what the penalty is, if they've lost their license, if they've been suspended. Yeah,
I think it's helpful because it does, keep people from getting into trouble, I think, because you certainly don't want to have that on your state bar.
It's helped me.
Yeah.
Because when I've had difficulties with a particular agent, and I've looked, I just make it a part of my game plan to look everybody up. And this one particularly difficult broker had been in trouble twice. He had lost his license twice. Wow. And in our conversation, I said, I'm trying to help the buyer and seller stay together and close this escrow on time. That's my only interest. And I said, do you really want to lose your license for the third time? And it got the energy got very funky on the telephone for a moment there. And from that point forward, he was an outstanding broker. Outstanding. Question number 10, back to the Actor Studio. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Thanks for trying.
Thanks for trying. I love it. You can see those on YouTube. There's a collection of these actors and how they answer that. And of course, Tom Hanks is the most eloquent in his answer.
Well, now I have to see it.
Yeah. But Sean Penn, all these, household name actors and actresses, they've been well prepared to answer that question, and they just. So, Chris, in closing, tell us where can people find you on the interweb?
Out there in the World Wide Webs, we are at ChristopherBJohnson.com, and that's my website and my name.
Christopher B. What's your middle name?
Bernard.
Christopher Bernard Johnson.
And so
nice.
Christopher B is in Bernard Johnson.com.
Christopher B. There's got to be a good legal word that you can remind people. You know, if you're on the telephone, it's Christopher B. Johnson, B like bankruptcy, or B like
that beneficial interest.
Christopher B. like beneficial.
Yes, beneficiary.
Like beneficiary.
That'd be a little closer to what I do. I always say B as in boy, but yeah, beneficiary is better.
B as in beneficiary.
Thanks for the tip there. And you can search my name too, but probably Pasadena, because I believe there is another Chris Johnson who's had some trouble with the bar out there.
Oh.
And then he may have retired, but there's a Christopher Johnson, former Tennessee Titans running back.
Oh.
Also, Simi Valley's #1 realtor, Christopher B. Johnson, and all those are not me.
Jeez.
So.
So I guess if we're Googling, we should say Christopher Johnson, Pasadena lawyer.
Yes.
And that would cover
That'll
all the
get
bases.
you, yeah.
Awesome.
That gets you there.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I want to, we'll certainly share this with everybody. And in a couple of months, I'd like to get you and Mary Winters together to dig into more aging and elder issues. Because I remember Mary, I mean, you guys have been buddies for a long, long time, right?
Yeah.
And I got to do a TV show with her for 18 months or so.
Yeah, and she's great, and is a giant help in helping you think of the answers to questions you didn't know you should have about aging and making sure that all goes the way you want it to.
Yeah. So that'll be fun. That'll be great fun. So thanks very much again.
Well, thank you. This has been fun.
Good fun. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching or listening.